The library was my space, and there was just so much.
To the Harbor Grace excursion with the boys to have a time.
Hello, ladies.
Hello.
Hello.
I'm wearing my turtleneck in honor of our beloved Nora Ephron. And because inconceivably it is turtleneck weather still,
Yeah.
so.
Crazy.
So Ilana, as mentioned, you have written a book, Nora Ephron at the Movies, looking at the rom-com genre, specifically through her lens. And Esther, your book, Falling in Love at the Movies, looks at rom-coms through a broader sweep, everything from classics like The Philadelphia Story to Roman Holiday, movies ranging from Pretty Woman, The Holiday, to, yes, of course, Sleepless in Seattle, 13 Going on 30, How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days, 500 Days of Summer, Groundhog Day, all of them. But Ilana, I am going to start with you. I feel like we might as well just start with your wedding vows.
Okay.
Because something I discovered reading your book is that you were planning your wedding while writing this book, and you worked in Nora, etc., into those vows. So do tell.
Yeah, so I mean, I was just talking to Esther about this, but I would not recommend planning a wedding and writing a book at the same time. It's really stressful. But when I was growing up, I feel like I was just obsessed with rom-coms, and I always wanted to be in one. I grew up I'm Jewish, but I grew up every Christmas, like, making up the scenario that I would meet the guy of my dreams, like, while I was eating Chinese food with my family on Christmas. I just, like, had these...
The meet cute.
Yes, the meet cute.
Yeah.
Like, many delusional thoughts like that. And it was such a big part of who I am, what I love. And when I was getting married, I felt like, in some ways, writing a book about a rom-com queen and planning my wedding, it felt like she needed to be a part of my vows. And the fact that rom-coms have just been such an integral part of my life, it was necessary. So I talked about Nora because my husband knew how much of my life it had taken up in my life. And then I, brought up some of my favorite rom-com heroines as well. So yeah, it was special.
Nice. Perhaps we can zoom out a little bit before we return to Nora. I guess I wanted to ask you, Esther, what are the parameters of rom-com? What is a rom-com and what is not? For instance, in your book, you mention the Billy Wilder film, The Apartment, which is considered by some to be a rom-com, but it is, it's a rom-com about depression, I believe.
There are a lot of rom-coms about
That's
depression,
right, yeah.
I think.
So what is it, like the Before trilogy, for instance, with Ethan Hawke and Julie Delpy, is that a rom-com? So I don't know.
Well, I would
Tell
argue
us.
that that one's complicated because I don't think the whole trilogy is, but I do think the first two align, and the third one is mostly is more of a marriage. I mean, the interesting thing about rom-coms is, like, it is a genre that's, like, as incredibly old. Some of, like, the template is basically largely set by the Shakespearean comedies. Everyone gets married at the end.
Some cross-dressing.
Lots of cross-dressing. Everyone gets married at the end, and was sort of, but sort of defined in Hollywood. There are many silent. You can look at certain like Buster Keaton titles as rom-coms, like Sherlock Jr., so there were silent rom-coms. But, the template that I think Nora really follows in is the screwball comedy, which sort of arose in the, in the late 1930s, early 1940s, largely sort of in tandem with the Hollywood production code, which it came in 1936 and basically was putting restrictions on what you could and couldn't put on screen. And so it's sort of the innuendo, the sort of ridiculous scenarios, the really sort of came to be defined in that era, the term screwball actually, it was they were titled screwballs because it used in a review of the film My Man Godfrey, but it happened one night is sort of considered like the one that from which everything flows.
And Carol Lombard was
Carol
very much
Lombard
considered.
was called
Yeah.
the screwball. Was called the screwball in the review of My Man Godfrey, which in Variety, and so. And I think that's like the template that you can really, I mean, like Nora's, she was very upfront about her affection for these movies and their inspiration on her. And so that's sort of the template from which everything flows.
You write in your book also that Nora Ephron is to rom-coms what Martin Scorsese is to gangster movies. So perhaps you can weigh in on this, because I mean, obviously you're being a little cheeky when you say that, and because Nora was a lot of things.
And as I
yeah.
say in the book, Martin Scorsese does not only make gangster movies. It's
Yes.
sort of
yes. In fact, Age of Innocence is my favorite.
it's
Martin
a gangster movie in a way.
That's right. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Vicious society, basically. Right. Yeah. But yeah, why don't you tell us a little bit about Nora, like before maybe she became sort of known as the rom-com person, because she wrote Silkwood, for instance, right?
Yes.
And tell us about Heartburn. Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, Silkwood she had written a feature film before, but wasn't credited, I don't think she was credited. But Silkwood was her first feature film. She wrote it with Alice Arlen and worked with Mike Nichols, and that was a biopic of Karen Silkwood. And it was very different, if you've ever seen it, from her rom-com work. And I feel like, a lot of, I would say, millennials maybe haven't seen it, or Gen Z, because I had to order a DVD on Amazon. It's hard to watch. I think it just got added somewhere. And then, Heartburn is arguably her most personal work. It's based on her autobiographical novel of the same name, and it's a fictionalized account, fictionalized in quotes, about her marriage to Carl Bernstein and the infidelity of their marriage. And
it's almost like an anti-rom-com.
yes,
Right?
But I consider it an honorary member of the rom-com trio. It's a breakup rom-com.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of stand by that. But it's just such a great personal story, but the acting is incredible. The food references.
So many food references.
So many food references. The key lime pie in the face, the carbonara in bed. Incredible.
The famous vinaigrette that lives
Yes.
on in social media we were talking
Yes,
about.
the vinaigrette.
Yeah. I think one writer once said that Nora channeled heartbreak into pop art, and I think
Oh yeah, Aaron Carlson.
yeah, and I think Heartburn is the prime example of that. Yeah. I'm wondering if both of you can weigh in a little bit about how much Nora herself was inspired by older cinema and films that came before her, and how this falls into the larger matrix of film history. There's so many Easter eggs, right?
I think it's like, it is so clear. I mean, if you've watched any of her movies, she is constantly making, obviously You've Got Mail is based around Lubitsch's Shop Around the Corner, which is sort of, and Lubitsch was sort of one of the fathers of the rom-com, along with like Preston Sturges, and who she also was in such admiration of. And, even beyond sort of the rom-com, cinematic history, there's the whole discussion of Casablanca and When Harry Met Sally. There's An Affair to Remember in Sleepless in Seattle.
There's that moment where Rosie O'Donnell tells her,
Yeah.
you don't want to be in love, you want to be in love in a movie.
And
right?
then there's Rita Wilson describing the plot and crying, and I think, but it's so. What's interesting is, it doesn't really confine to rom-com. She was a voracious consumer of cinema as a whole, and you can see that throughout the work.
Mm-hmm. Did you want to add anything to that?
I mean, you kind of covered what I. Yeah. No, I mean, you nailed it.
Yeah. I also think, like, conversely, it's interesting how many people have now been inspired by Nora.
Yeah.
I mean, you see it in the work of everything Mindy Kaling does, and Lena Dunham, and what was that show? Nobody Wants This.
Complicated feelings.
With Adam Brody.
The Aaron Foster, the Foster sisters
very
show.
much had
Yeah.
Nora. And of course, there. Yes,
Oh, sorry.
go on.
I was going to say we were talking about before, but Materialists, the Celine Song movie.
Oh.
I feel like there's a scene that just it feels like it was inspired by heartburn directly. I feel like there's a lot of moments in that movie.
Tell the audience what the material is.
Oh, Materialists is Celine Song's new movie with Pedro Pascal, Chris Evans, and Dakota Johnson.
I love that I just heard a gasp from the audience when she mentioned Pedro Pascal.
Yeah,
there was like literally
I believe it comes out
there
next
was
week
like
or
Yeah.
soon. Yeah.
in June 13th.
Yeah.
It's very good.
And have you guys spent much time at Katz's Deli? Yeah.
I have.
I have over the years too.
Yeah.
We have. Yeah.
Yeah.
New York institution.
I mean,
I can
that's
only eat it every so often. Those sandwiches are.
Yeah.
I did go to one of my favorite reporting memories is I did have lunch with Henry Winkler at Katz's Deli.
Whoa,
so
that's
that
a flex.
That's maybe my favorite Katz's Deli moment. He was flocked. You see the Fonz eating pastrami, and it's
my God.
insane.
Well, that is an interesting example of there may be people who've never seen When Harry Met Sally, but who know that scene, like, or that's saying I'll have what she's having, and the fact that it was spoofed recently, right?
Don't get me started on that ad.
Yeah.
I'm so mad
the
about
Mayo
that.
ad.
The Mayo
The
ad.
Super
I hate
Bowl
it.
ad.
Yeah.
Oh, you don't think they should have done it? Yeah.
No, I hate it. Also, like,
Yeah.
mayo
It's
as the
cheesy.
condiment for Katz's.
I was like, they're not putting mayo
come on,
on.
it's mustard. Like, what are you
Yeah.
doing?
But they gave us a reunion, I guess.
Well, and yeah,
Sure.
and Meg and Billy got a nice check.
Yes,
So,
exactly.
So did Sydney Sweet.
Oh yeah, I forgot she was in it.
I'm wondering if we can talk a little bit about Nora Ephron versus Nancy Myers, because they often get lumped together, but they're quite different, I think. Yeah. What are your thoughts about the two of them? Yeah.
I mean, do you want to? I sort of wrote about it a little bit in my book because, like, I was trying basically in this book to cover a lot of the history of this genre in a short span of time, and so sort of thinking about how things get lumped together, and I sort of thought of them in the context of like other sort of rom-com pairs, like as I mentioned, Lubitsch and Sturgis, and I think their sensibilities are it's the same way that Lubitsch and Sturgis's sensibilities were incredibly different. Nancy and Nora's sensibilities are incredibly different, even though they followed similar paths, like both starting in writing before sort of behind the director's chairs. But they're I think Nancy's movies tend to be sort of more sprawling and unwieldy, even as she is sort of is known as one of the most sort of intensely, like, does more takes than David Fincher is sort of her reputation. So specific, but the movies themselves tend to be a little bit more unwieldy, and I think Nora has like a tighter grasp on the plot. Nora's movies, I think, tend to be a little bit more like a little spikier, a little bit more sort of,
I think you say that Nora's films are like martinis, and Nancy's are like mimosas, right? Yeah. Yeah.
It's like a long leisurely lunch when you're watching a Nancy Myers film. You're not just like sort of walloped in the same way.
Yeah, and I mean, my biggest, I guess, contrast is, well, they both have very distinct aesthetics. Like Nora's aesthetic is very lived in, very cozy, and Nancy's is very clean, sleek. We love those giant kitchens. We want that island. But they're both aspirational, just very different. And I feel like also there were only so many women directing movies at that time, so it's easy for Nora and Nancy to be lumped together, and still to this day, even though their work is quite different.
And I also think like the aspirational is sort of, in some ways, like Nancy's movies are more overtly aspirational. In a way, like the Nora movies are they're more aspirational now than they were back then when they came out. Like
Retroactively aspirational.
They're retroactively aspirational. You can get like a great apartment on the Upper West Side for not that much money when those movies were made. And now we look back at them and we're like, wow, this is sort of the ideal. Whereas Nancy's movies, it's like, you're not going to get that house in the Hamptons from Something's Gotta Give in any reasonable context.
Let's drill down into the aesthetic of both of them, because what I think is particularly interesting about Nora is that she's really become like this one-woman autumn mood board, right? Like every September, October on social media, there's so many riffs on her. Talk about her whole style.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like if you look at primarily When Harry Met Sally, Sleepless in Seattle, and You've Got Mail, I would say if you're more so You've Got Mail and When Harry Met Sally, you see all of the clothing is not only very 90s or late 80s, but it's turtlenecks, cozy sweaters, it's boyfriend jeans and blazers, tweed blazers and bowler hats, and it's somehow become emblematic of autumn. And
yeah, I can't think of a director who's associated with a season more than her. Yeah.
Also, oddly enough, I feel like also she's like a secret Christmas movie person. If you're thinking about like, there's always like a Christmas thing, like Michael, for instance. But, you know, we've gotten to the point where the first day of fall, people automatically use a photo of Meg Ryan's Kathleen Kelly carrying a pumpkin from You've Got Mail as like a meme, and like happy Meg Ryan fall or happy Nora Ephron fall. And we all aspire to dress like them because it's like chic and cozy. It's aspirational still, but there's something about it, the nostalgia of it just never really goes away. It's timeless. And I think that's been really cool to see.
Yeah. And meanwhile, Nancy Meyers, via Diane Keaton, brought the coastal grandmother look a couple of years ago, the all white, right? Yeah, yeah. Are there other like stylistic things that?
I mean, it's so interesting to talk about, like, because you know, when Harry Met Sally came out, there was criticism that it was sort of a Woody Allen rip, and obviously, you know, we're all here to talk about it. It obviously is influenced clearly, but it is not a ripoff. But you know, you can see there's like that circular thing, like you can see like Diane Keaton and Annie Hall filter down to like that hat that Meg Ryan wears like right outside of the museum, then like circling back around to Diane Keaton becoming like an icon, like an older generational icon, and Something's Gotta Give, that like there's something, you know. And Diane does, you know, she's more of a Nancy girl, especially in the, you know, though she did do she did Hanging Up, so it's like but she did Baby Boom, which is a Nancy movie, so yeah, it's all in the stew. Yes.
Can we talk a little bit about technology in Nora Ephron movies? Because something people mention a lot with rom-coms and why maybe they don't have, you know, the same halo that they used to is because technology has rendered a lot of the obstacles that lovers have to face as moot. Like, would You've Got Mail or Sleepless in Seattle work now? In terms of plot points. Yeah.
I was going to say, I don't think Sleepless in Seattle would work now because essentially Annie is stalking Sam.
I was going to say the same thing. Like,
it'd be like one scroll.
My controversial take is like, that is my least favorite of them. I think it's like a miracle that movie works at all, and it is like entirely credit to the screenplay and to like their performances, because if you just like drill down the basics, it's insane.
Oh yeah.
And so, yeah, I think that is an alchemy of a movie, like, as you said, that, like, is just sort of a miracle that it, but yeah, it's crazy. She's being...
And we live our lives so much sort of performatively online now that, those plots hinge on...
Yeah. And I was going to say, with You've Got Mail, like, that would be a catfishing scenario now. But, like, also, and the thing is, I am a You've Got Mail lover. It is my number one Nora Ephron rom-com.
That's my number one.
It really
Same.
is.
Yeah.
And, like, but at the same time, throughout all of this, it does feel a little icky that Joe knows that for a good portion of the movie that, he's talking with Kathleen, and like, also he's putting her out of business. Yeah. So it's like, I don't know if that would work today
but
at all.
I do think the one thing about You've Got Mail that like is sort of the history of it, and one of the reasons, like, it is the foundation, is I do think that is a story that works like, I do think someone could figure out a way to make a modern version of this story, because it has been so, it was the play, it was Shop Around the Corner, then there's a musical, She Loves Me, which is based on Shop Around the Corner, and then, You've Got Mail, and it sort of works in every context, and so I sort of believe the fundamentals of that story, and the professional enemies that are secretly communicating are so strong that like it could work in any context. And it is funny because like when you watch it, like it's shocking how well that movie holds up for, starting with the freaking dial-up sound.
All these nothings have meant more to me than all these somethings, right? Yeah.
And I just do think that like that essential story is so elemental that it's really, if somebody figured out a way to do it smartly, it would work.
I agree. Celine song.
Go for it. Yeah. Esther, I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about the idea of the meet cute that we mentioned. It's so elemental to rom-coms, but a fairly recent development as a phrase, right? Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
No, actually not. I'm trying to cite the exact. If I look in my book, I could cite the exact
Was
date.
it some journalist? Right?
But like it was. I believe but I believe like the phrase was used. He was finding the phrase. He was writing about it in like the 80s. But it was I think the essential meet cute is I believe that the phrase that was used was like Claudette Colbert drops like something on Fred McMurray's like foot, or you can find it in the book. I'm blanking on the actual like phrase, but the classic. I think the reason. Honestly, you can credit Nancy Meyers with the reason it has become so colloquial, and the fact that people who are not screenwriters are aware of it.
People use it in every day.
I think that's because I think that largely has to do with like the fact that it is in the holiday.
Right.
Eli Wallach like runs across Kate Winslet, and he's like, "This is our meet cute," because he's like an old screenwriter, and the example that he uses is from the Lubitsch movie Bluebeard's Eighth Wife, which is a wild movie if you've ever seen it. But basically, it's Claudette Colbert and Gary Cooper are at a shop, and he needs at a department store, he needs a top shirt to wear to sleep, but he doesn't wear the bottoms. She needs the bottoms because he doesn't know what it's for. He thinks she's maybe buying it for her husband, but she's actually buying it for her father. So, and they sort of try to split the pajamas, and that is the meet cute, and essentially the one that Nancy Meyers cites. But I do think the fact that it was in that movie, The Holiday, is the reason that it has become so like the fact that it's sort of everyone knows what the meet cute is for many ways, and it's also but it's funny because it's like I don't know, it's like. I think that scenario can be done very well. But also it's like I don't think When Harry Met Sally has like a meet cute, because it's like they're forced together in a car. And
It has to be happenstance, right?
Yeah, the meet cute is sort of like something. I actually think Nora's rom-coms don't really have them that much in a way, because they're not so
Cut and dry.
They're sort of more about
They're more like meat stock.
well, yeah, I mean,
Depending on the
Sleepless
movie.
in Seattle, like for sure. But it's more, in some ways, they feel sort of more lived in, outside of that one. They feel sort of more lived in a way that it's not this sort of like, oh, cute, splitting pajamas situation.
The meet cute I often think about is the Notting Hill one, like
That's
Julia
a classic
Roberts
one.
meeting Hugh Grant in the bookstore, right?
And he spills orange juice on
Yeah.
her, and
Yeah. Do you have a favorite meet cute from a Nora movie or a non-Nora movie?
I mean,
yeah.
I love How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days.
Yes.
And just,
Remind me what the setup was.
Andy Anderson and Ben Barry. Andy is a magazine writer, and she ends up writing an article about, she tries to lose a guy in 10 days.
Kate Hudson, yeah.
Kate Hudson.
Shot in Toronto.
Yeah. And they have it's a very like seemingly sweet meet cute, and then it like turns into like hellish for several days.
Yeah.
So at a bar.
Well, because I brought up Notting Hill, I thought we'd take a few minutes to talk about Julia Roberts. I don't think you can talk about rom-coms without talking about Julia, especially how she lorded over that domain in the 80s, 90s, and beyond. We could talk about Pretty Woman, we could talk about Notting Hill, but I want to talk about My Best Friend's Wedding, because I'd never not want to talk about My Best Friend's Wedding. Primarily because that's another one which
It's
is
a mean fucking movie.
she's diabolical and a
so
monster
mean.
in that movie, and kind of is the heroine.
it's a really mean movie in
Yeah.
a way that I really like.
Yeah, right.
I mean, she's so caustic in that movie that they, had a real problem when they were making it in terms of figuring out the ending, because there was this sort of after the early testings, there's debate about like, what do we owe this character who basically did so many horrible things, and it ended up there was originally shot where where she actually does find a guy at the wedding, played by briefly John Corbett, Aiden of Sex and the City, but audiences felt that was like honestly too much of a reward for the character because she had been she tortured poor Cameron Diaz, and it ended up being that like Rupert Everett was such a breakout star of that movie that as they were filming it, they sort of kept adding him more and more, and they realized that is sort of the perfect ending for her is her dancing with him. There's like, she's still dancing, she's still sort of having fun, she's maybe learned a little bit from her ways, but she's not like getting the guy in the end. And you can debate like, how much, should we punish our female heroines? But she is really, really mean in that movie.
Right. I also think it's wild that the movie hinges on the idea that if neither Julia or Dermot Mulroney are married by 28, that they will marry each other. Like, it's like we're the 90s, like that long ago.
But I think that's the thing about the Nora movies, that like they do feel, they feel, I mean, I think she feels like distressingly young in Sleepless in Seattle. Do you remember? Like,
yeah, I feel like I don't remember the age.
Like distressingly young to like us 30-somethings now.
But,
But
like-
like, yeah. But they do feel more, everyone feels a little bit more mature in them.
Yes.
Than,
Life phases seem different.
than like a
right?
lot of,
Yeah.
rom-coms.
I think also because like Nora was older when she was making those movies too, and had been through a lot in her own relationships.
Do you have any other thoughts about My Best Friend's Wedding? Yeah.
I mean, I'm aligned,
So many.
but like I
Yeah.
remember growing up watching that movie and really thinking Cameron Diaz was the enemy. Growing up, like that's what I thought. But then you get older, you rewatch, and you're like, oh, I was completely
It's also
wrong.
supposed to be in college, which is crazy.
I know. I'm like, how am I getting mad at this? Cameron
You're not
Diaz
ready for that
girl?
discussion. Yeah.
Child.
I know.
Let's talk a little bit in terms of other players in the rom-com world. Hugh Grant, in your book, Esther, you call him a rom-com institution unto himself. You know, when he was doing all of those movies, post Four Weddings and a Funeral. What was it about him? He was kind of a mess, right?
Well, I mean, yes,
an adorable mess.
But
Yeah.
I think he was very much hailed as the second coming of like Cary Grant when he burst onto the scene in Four Weddings and a Funeral. He has great like dramatic roles before then. Morris, the Merchant Ivory movie is like incredible, and if you haven't seen it, I really, really recommend it. And he's so good in that. But I think it's he was very much seen, after Four Weddings and a Funeral, written by Richard Curtis, directed by Mike Newell. Like, we see the sort of Brit rom-com exploding, and he was very much the face of that, able to break through. But I think it's what's interesting. And he is that sort of endearing, what he did so well was that sort of endearing guy that could verge into a little bit of a cad when you wanted him to be, which is the sort of Cary Grant mold. And it's interesting.
It goes back to Jane Austen even.
Yeah.
Right?
And he did Sense and Sensibility, the fabulous Ang Lee, adaptation of that. I think, I think the interesting thing to talk about, which also circles back to Nora a little bit, is how we perceive people that star in rom-coms. And, I think Hugh Grant, he obviously had some personal problems, but but actually really came out of that totally fine. That was literally in his heyday. But he struggled once the genre sort of was reaching, in the mid 2000s, once he was aging, the genre was reaching, sort of a stasis, flat period. He had a hard time breaking out, even though he's an incredible actor who can do a lot of different things, which we see now because he's having this whole second revival, sort of playing all these wacky characters. And I think you can really look at that with Meg Ryan as an interesting case, and with her, there's a lot of sexism involved as well. As a woman starts to age, people didn't want to. Once she sort of tried to do stuff that wasn't cute in the way that she became known for, there was a real revolt about that. You just look at the reviews for the wonderful Jane Campion movie In the Cut, which is a really risky role for her, and people loathed it in large part because this wasn't the Meg Ryan that we fell in love with. So it's an interesting, I think, there's an interesting thing about how we talk about people that star in these movies, because we very much expect them to be one thing. But that only happened sorry, I'm still talking, I'll shut up soon. That only really happened in this sort of second wave of rom-coms, the sort of the sort of 89, when Harry Met Sally, through the 2000s, because you look back, Gary Cooper was an incredible an incredible star of rom-coms, even though I think if you say Gary Cooper to most people, they'll be Westerns,
Or Cary Grant in Hitchcock,
or Cary
but
Grant,
was a leading
it's
romantic foil as well.
There's Holly, our idea of celebrity became, I think, a lot more limited.
Ilana, maybe you can tell us about the pairing of Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan specifically, because that's one of the great rom-com pairings. What is it about that audiences responded to?
I think, speaking from my own perspective, the chemistry is just off the chart. I always reference, that's why I love You've Got Mail so much. Tom Hanks is so forgivable when he basically proposes to Meg Ryan towards the end of You've Got Mail, and it's the way he looks at her, it's the delivery. He just has this inherent charisma, and her awkward self. Just the response is it's like so alluring.
I
And
can't remember if it's you who said it or you, but someone said Tom and Meg were rom-com leads for a neurotic era. Yeah. Yeah. Is that you? Yeah.
both, I mean, I think they were both neurotic. I think
Yeah.
that, they showed that they could make magic together multiple times. Joe versus the Volcano, Sleepless in Seattle, You've Got Mail. And I feel like they became, like Julia Roberts and Richard Gere, like they became these figures that we wanted more pairings like that. Like Kate Hudson and Matthew McConaughey. We wanted to see that chemistry and that connection on screen.
I mean, I think it's interesting because, like, it is sort of like go back to the people resist. Like, they didn't, there was resistance to doing You've Got, like, Tom Hanks especially was really resistant to doing You've Got Mail, in part because, like, he didn't want to repeat the same things. He also was like, he'd been compared to Jimmy Stewart so much throughout, like, as like the new Jimmy Stewart, that taking on a role that essentially Jimmy Stewart played was scary for them. But I do think another thing about that pairing too is, especially in like Sleepless and You've Got Mail, they they nail those final moments so well, as Ilana was saying, but they're also not on screen together for a lot of the movie. And I think it's like you believe that these two people they play the roles with such intelligence that you believe that these two people are matched, because you can sort of feel, and I think that goes back to the way Nora wrote the screenplays. You can feel the sort of like intelligent match of these people even before they're actually in the same room.
And I feel like even though I'm not really a Sleepless in Seattle fan, I feel like the reason people love it so much is because even though Tom and Meg have basically one scene together, it works. The chemistry. I don't think it's something everyone could pull off.
And in that one, like, I think it's like what they're both doing and what they're both portraying is like longing. Like, he is dealing with this massive grief. She's dealing with this sort of deep dissatisfaction with her life. Poor Bill Pullman. He's just like doing his job. And so you feel both the sort of like existential angst of those characters. Whereas like I think You've Got Mail, even when they're not on screen at each other, you feel each character looking for like an intellectual match, and then they're finding it in their correspondence, that they're not with with their partners, even though those partners are ostensibly like quote unquote.
But did we not all want a separate movie just about Parker Posey's character?
Of course.
You've Got Mail.
Of course, she's gonna get her eyes lasered.
Because movies, rom-coms, so often hinge on the combustion, both romantic and intellectual. I'm wondering if we could dial back and talk a little bit about the famous pairing of Rock Hudson and Doris Day. I thought that was a very interesting part of your book, because they had like such dark personal lives to some extent. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think. Oh, sorry, I'll use the mic. Yeah, I mean, those movies are fascinating. If you haven't watched them recently, I really would recommend
Pillow
them.
Talk, right?
Yeah, Pillow Talk. I actually love Lover Comes Back, which is their second collaboration, which is very much like if you love Mad Men, it's sort of a perfect. It's a perfect rom-com for that, because they literally play warring ad agencies, and I think those movies are so interesting because they were, I think we look back at them now as a little bit, Doris Day is seen as so cute, Rock Hudson, obviously, as we know, he was closeted and he died of AIDS, but like he was seen at the time as such a sort of like standard romantic lead. But those movies are so spiky. She is always playing a career, like outside of their final Send Me No Flowers, sort of their final one, which is more takes place in like the suburban world. She's always playing a career woman. She's always playing someone who...
Yeah, I thought that was very interesting.
So she's always playing someone who can hold her own. They do get into that like weird, icky territory that a lot of rom-coms deal with, including Sleepless in Seattle, which is the sort of, and including You've Got Mail, which is the whole deception issue, because basically in both those movies, he puts on a whole act, pretends he's someone entirely different, and woos her that way. But you know, I think for pairings that were seen as that I think we can look back on and see as sort of very all-American, there's like a real edge to those movies that I really love.
Yeah. I thought it was interesting in considering another older pairing, when you talked about Spencer Tracy and Katharine Hepburn, you felt like that they didn't really have that much chemistry on screen, even though they were a real couple, and that Katharine Hepburn and Cary Grant.
That's like my Sleepless in Seattle hot take. Is
Yeah.
I just don't really love the Tracy Hepburn movies as much as I love the Hepburn Grant movies as a pairing. I feel like, I don't know, you watch them back. It's sort of the opposite of like the Doris Day Rock Hudson movies. Like you watch them back and there's something that feels, even though similarly, Katharine Hepburn always playing really, you know, women who are very accomplished in their careers. There's something sort of paternalistic, I think, about those movies in a way that icks me out. For lack of a better term, I'm sorry.
Ilana, returning to Nora for a moment. Harry tells Sally at one point in the film famously, you're the worst kind, you're high maintenance, but you think you're low maintenance. Talk about the whole idea of these high maintenance ladies in rom-coms, that this trope. Yeah.
I mean, I would say the trope is more, it adds to these quirks to these female leads. So When Harry Met Sally, Sally is extremely anal retentive about the way she orders. She orders, I think, a slice of pie at one point, but she wants the ice cream on the side, and if they don't have a certain flavor, then she doesn't want ice cream at all, but she wants the pie heated. And you could see the wheels turning in Billy Crystal's head as this is happening, but he like doesn't see it. But the thing is, even despite that, it's seen as quirky and endearing. Even though it's annoying,
and she's a stand-in for Nora.
And she's a stand-in, yeah,
like the ultimate high maintenance.
Yes. I mean, the ordering is quintessentially Nora.
Yes.
So,
yeah.
And that's probably the character, other than Rachel Samstat in Heartburn, that is.
She was very much an
her.
atheist when it came to square tables. She only believed in round tables. I got that from your book.
Better for conversation.
Yes, better for conversation. Yes, yeah.
It's true.
We could talk forever. There's so many movies we could discuss. I just, before we open it up to the audience, I did want to ask both of you if there's an underrated, in your opinion, rom-com that people should go out and watch. What's a movie that has a special parcel of your heart?
I mean, there's so many. Researching this book, I was catching up on stuff that I'd missed. I really love this movie, The More the Merrier, which is a George Stevens movie starring Jean Arthur. That is it takes place in wartime Washington, D.C., when there was a housing crisis, and this sort of this career woman played by Jean Arthur she wants a female roommate and ends up getting this sort of a charming older man who then rents out half of his side of the room to a handsome soldier.
Sounds very progressive for the time. Yeah,
it's incredibly progressive, and I really love that movie. I really think of that. I mean, a more recent entry that I think that I always sort of evangelize is this movie Rye Lane, which came out a couple of years ago. I believe it's available in the States. I'm not sure here on Hulu, but it's a British rom-com. It's sort of it's named after a neighborhood. It's sort of a walk, in the sort of before a sunrise style walk around the city. People bond over the course of one day rom-com, and I think it's really worth a watch and like proof that like people are still doing it.
One that I feel like is maybe forgotten or a little bit overlooked is Sleeping with Other People by Leslie Headland, and it's very inspired by When Harry Met Sally. It has Jason Sudeikis, right? Jason Sudeikis and Alison Brie in it, and basically they had a one-night stand in college. They meet again, I think, in a sex addicts group, and they like are like, even though we're attracted to each other, let's stay friends. And of course, that leads to complications. So that's one. There's a movie that came out recently. I think it was on Paramount Plus, but it's called Sweethearts, and it's also very Nora.
It's on 8 Max.
What?
HBO Max.
Oh, HBO Max, sorry.
Formerly
Not Paramount. And that was really cute with Kieran Shipka, and it also had homages to Nora Ephron, to When Harry Met Sally. But I feel like it was a bit overlooked if it kind of came and went, but people who saw it really enjoyed it.
And I'm just going to give a little shout out to Birdcage, which I think is just perfect movie, like just as the setting of Miami. And I also think it's so interesting, just like pre-gay marriage as a portrait. Yes. And Nathan Lane and Robin Williams are delightful.